So I've not written any books. And when I came in this morning, interestingly enough, there's actually a Fidelity conference happening on the other side of this floor. So when I saw all these familiar faces, I thought, oh shit, I'm going to have to change everything I say. But then I happily discovered that it's a separate conference, so that's all good. So before we start, Fidelity, just in case you're not clear, so Fidelity is it's an asset management company, so investments, pensions, that kind of thing. 2.4 million customers, and Fidelity International Limited, which is where I work. Think about us as the world minus America. That's Fidelity International. What a happy thought. But plus Canada. So that's Fidelity. And let's start with a couple of exercises, actually. So I'm going to get you to do something for me now. So let's see. So I'm going to give you 2 briefs that are going to last, 30 seconds each? You're going to have to stand up. And be prepared to move. Okay? So the first brief, very simple. It is this. Go. 30 seconds. Everybody. Keep going. Keep going. Right. I'll take a photo of you high-fiving me. Thank you. Is that all right? Okay. All right. Time to do that. Okay. Stop. Stay where you are. Okay, so second exercise, very similar. I'm going to give you 30 seconds for this exercise. Ready? Go. 30 seconds. Start. Okay, great. So now we all sit down. So let's just talk about that for a second. So the first brief that you had, 30 seconds, high five everyone. So how was that? Was that easy?
Yes.
Why was it so easy?
You know what you've got to do.
You know what you've got to do. Okay, so it's easy because we know what we have to do. So therefore, it's a bit of a process issue, and I assume most of us know already how to high five. And if you don't, you'd observe it happening, or you'd even ask someone, how do I high five? So it was a known outcome. You know what you had to do, and you knew what your goal was. You had to do it in 30 seconds, and success would be, achieving that goal within that 30-second time frame. How about the second one? How was that? How easy was that? Why wasn't it so easy?
You don't know what makes people happy.
You don't know what makes people happy. So that's exactly right. So it was really interesting. I often do this, and we did it in India recently, and everybody instantly started hugging everyone else, which is really interesting. And we've seen it we did it in Dublin as well. But 30 seconds, let's think about that. I gave you an unreasonable time frame, didn't I? Because you don't know, as you said, Paul, you don't really know what motivates someone or what they'd like in that scenario. So I gave you an unreasonable deadline, and what were you doing? How were you approaching the brief? What were you doing? Because I couldn't see any hugging, so what was going on? Were you starting to talk to each other?
Smiling.
Sorry, smiling?
Paid a compliment.
Paying a compliment, okay. So, yeah, offering alcohol, that's a brilliant one. So often what happens in that kind of unreasonable situation, that 30-second deadline, is we try and think, well, what are we going to do? We've got 30 seconds. We've got to do something. We've got to get to a solution, but it's an unknown solution. Okay, I'll jump to an assumption. And when we see that happening often, like I say, people start hugging. So I'll make an assumption that you don't mind being hugged, even though I don't know you. And that might be the right assumption, or it could be a horrifically bad assumption. You might be phobic, or I might be phobic about being hugged. So in that instance, making everyone happy is an unknown outcome, unlike high five, and we know what we need to do. So that's a good example in my world as a service designer of a messy problem. So we love messy problems in service design, which is what I do at Fidelity. So a messy problem is simply a problem where the solution is unknown. I do not know what the solution to this is. And therefore, when we approach messy problems, the question is, how are we going to start that? We need to start to dig into the customer's world and understand what motivates them, who they are. So in this exercise, you know, the first thing I would do if I had a real chance to do it, I'd start to talk to you and say, well, what actually makes you happy? Can you give me an example of a time when you were really happy? What pisses you off? What really annoys you? So you start that process of discovery, understanding what actually motivates someone. Think about their world, their needs, their frustrations, what delights them, and so on and so forth. So in service design, we deal with messy problems. And obviously, service design as applied to customer experience it's also about the messiness that comes from being in a large organization when there are many, many moving parts that all need to work brilliantly together in order to deliver that perfect experience that you want to deliver to the customer. So lots of cogs working either brilliantly together or not. So that's a great example of messiness. So therefore, in the world of messy problems, we need to start by understanding the customer and really digging into the customer needs. And apart from anything else, and that's why Insight, of course, is so important, but apart from everything else, we need to start to try and attack what, I love this acronym, the zebras in the organization, which stands for zero evidence, but really adamant. Yeah? These are the people that say, well, why? We know what the answer is. I've worked here 20 years. I don't want to spend all this time doing this research, doing this analysis. I just need to get to that solution. So on our table, we were talking about that imperative to deliver all the time, and because that's what we are rewarded on. So in the world of service design, we actually have to say slow down sometimes. And sometimes that's not a very popular message. So the first rule of Service Design Club is FIL with the problem. And of course, FIL stands for Fidelity International Limited. Actually, it stands for fall in love, so it's just a happy coincidence. So fall in love with the problem. And we have a number of cards that we use. So this is always the topmost card, fill with the problem. So let's have a look. I can't quite remember what's on the back. So fill with the problem. Take time to fall in love with our client's problem and not the solution our business feels able to deliver. Be deliberately dumb and keep asking why. So the first rule of Service Design Club, and we use these in all our engagements and training. It's good ways of trying to get that kind of changed mindset instilled in the people that we interact with. So let me just tell you a bit about how we define service design, first of all. So this is a crowdsourced definition that's come from global, would you mind passing me some water, please? Come from global designers, UX designers, design thinkers. And there's a few key phrases in here that are quite interesting. So it talks about looking at the service from a customer perspective. Thank you. So coming back to falling in love with the problem, we have to take time to really understand what the needs, what the unmet needs, how people live their lives, what the feelings, what the emotions are. So customer perspective, critically important. Bit of a jargon alert, apologies. It's rooted in design thinking. So if you're wondering how does this fit with design thinking, we use design thinking tools and methodology to design the service. Collaborative, clearly, extreme collaboration, absolutely critical, because there is no one team that delivers the customer experience. It's a team sport. Every part of that organization has to work brilliantly together. and end-to-end. You probably can't see that down here, but end-to-end. So I think Alan was alluding to that earlier, but for us, we need to look at the bigger picture of that experience that will build over time, over many, many years, and think about what's the end-to-end impact of the experience that we desire to deliver. And of course, that will span multiple channels, multiple touch points as well. So I guess as I say all of this to you guys in the room, you're all just thinking, yeah, we get all that. It's common sense, right? So I could have just said service design is common sense. Because why on earth, if you think about it, why on earth wouldn't you say, let's start with the customer? Why on earth wouldn't you say, we need to collaborate better in order to deliver that? But obviously in the real world, this kind of common sense is often quite uncommon. So it is a challenge. And we have a number, as I say, we've got a number of our cards. I think the second one is quite a good one as well. Again, it's a challenge to the orthodoxy and to the way that the organisation thinks. So this one says, get out more. Okay? So on the back it says, embrace a beginner's mindset, stop being an expert. That's a really important message because people are employed to be experts, which means they feel they have to have all the answers. What we want is that beginner's mindset. How do you think like your customer? How do you understand your customer better? And stop jumping into solution mode. Instead, accept that you know nothing. Get out of the office and test your assumptions. So a lot of this is about a kind of different mindset, a different culture, and it's finding the opportunities to actually make those messages land. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So I love this quote. This is Peter Drucker. The worst thing in the world is to do very well that which should not be done at all. So service design is about stopping people doing brilliantly the wrong stuff. So we need to help people learn to fall in love with the problem and learn to explore the problem. So let me share, I'll take a few minutes on this slide. Let me share our process in overview. So I say our, it's not really our, so it's not Fidelity's, it's called the Double Diamond. It came about, I think, in the early 90s, UK Service Council. But as you can see, there are two diamonds, and the first one is all about the problem. And that's where we get involved. So if anything, we try and act as that catalyst that says, you know what, guys, that train that's just about to start moving, slow down, stop it, take the time to dig into the problem. So the first part is all about focusing on what's the right thing to do, so do the right thing. And in our world, that means being detectives. So we start by detectives, and you can see the shape of the first diamond. It's about that divergence. In other words, we cast our net far and wide in order to bring insight and bring information in. So we start by falling in love with the problem, and of course insight or data, metrics, NPS, complaints, anecdotal or ethnographic research, primary research. We do focus groups with employees who answer the phones, anything we can just to begin to understand what's the nature of this problem that we really want to take time to explore. So we are detectives in that first phase. And then having been detectives, we start the convergence, which is what are the insights? So we become like scientists. So it's all about analysis, synthesis. What are the big stories that could be emerging from this discovery phase as we start to define what's the real problem here? So act like scientists, start to, so in the first phase, we've heard talk about journey mapping, all that kind of good stuff. The outputs for us are journey maps of today's reality that we will use as we go forward, because you have to start by establishing a common understanding of today's pain points and today's problems and today's challenges. So that's a typical output from the first phase along with personas and so on. And at this stage, we're looking at a defined problem statement. We're looking at how might we statements. So anything we're doing in there is all about truly digging into that problem. And then as you can see from the visual, there is a deliberate gap between those two diamonds. So we call this the PPK moment, which stands for persevere, pivot, or kill. So it's a deliberate pause when we say, you know what, do we want to kill this before it even becomes a project and all the baggage and associations that go with that word project, or do we want to persevere? Assume we persevere, we get into the second diamond, which is all about that whole process of rapidly developing the ideas. So we'd start with ideation, and then we'd get into this classic kind of rapid style, agile. I hate to use the phrase, the word, it's a loaded word, but we get into this whole rapid prototyping process when we start small, you know, drawings or whatever, and we iterate, and we get into the lean startup process of build something, test it with your users, measure and learn, and then of course repeat. So we go through that process, and then of course, again, after that PPK moment, it can go through into delivery. So I've got to say, as I was coming up on the train this morning, I was looking through these slides and I thought, oh my God, that looks amazing. Even I am impressed by that. But I want to be clear. I want to be clear that this is our process. This is our methodology. And it's what we always sell into teams that come to us, but it doesn't always happen that way. So there are in the real world trade-offs, but part of my job is to make sure that there may be trade-offs, but there is a line beyond which you don't go, because you'll lose the integrity of the process. And to be honest, there have been a couple of occasions when we actually said no and walked away, because from the body language or from that kind of zebra-like behaviour, that focus on solution or unwillingness to put the time or the effort or the money in, it felt like it was not going to be a happy marriage. So please don't look at this and think, oh my God, Fidelity, amazing, all the stuff you're doing. Cliche alert, we're on a journey, as much as anyone is on a journey, and we learn as we go. So, what do I do? Because I want to focus on one thing in particular, but I just need to tell you a little bit more about what my job is. So it probably breaks out into 3 categories. So often, and by the way, you know, we are a small, perfectly formed service design team. In other words, you're looking at it, all right? So it's a team, but lots of allies and advocates and people that are growing with us. But what do? When I'm not supporting teams with this, we're doing training. So building the muscle, Alan talks about training. And the other thing we do is what we call culture nudging. And I want to just zoom in on the last few minutes on an example of how we're nudging the culture and how we're using service design within that process. So this is the CX Cup. So when I was in my previous employer, I introduced this. And then when I joined Fidelity 2 years ago, I introduced it. And in March of this year, we had the first grand final. So we've done it for 1 year. That evening, the CEO said, I want to make this annual, which is great. So it is a global competition for small teams to take part in the Customer Experience Cup. Strapline, make it happen, really important. To form around a problem. And this is for teams wherever they are in the business, whatever they do. Form around a problem and then work to make it happen, to do something. So very clearly, this is not an idea suggestion scheme. We've got loads of those already. This is a, for God's sake, do something about it scheme. Okay? And quickly by the numbers, in my darkest day, which is about a year ago, so we went live in November, in my darkest day, I had someone in our comms team saying, Rod, you know, this is the first time you might get 7 or 8 teams apply. We got 104 teams to apply to enter the competition. The top 10 teams then went into the process. It's a 5-month process, 2 intermediate judging rounds, and then 3 teams got up on stage in March of this year in London at a global leadership event for about 220 leaders, and they pitched. So they showed their working prototypes, they showed their business cases, they demonstrated the research, they showed films of the research that they had been doing. And the goal was always for one team to be announced the winner, and the little judging panel of our senior GOC members said, let's fund the second one as well, because it feels like a no-brainer. So this is the team that actually won, called All On Board. They're from Germany and Luxembourg. So they're holding the cup, so it's like a Wembley-style trophy. It's now got their name engraved on it, with plenty of space for next year's winner. This is the CEO. And I always talked about this as a win-win-win. So it's a win for our customers, because as I say, it's not an idea suggestion scheme. This is a do something about it scheme. Clearly, it's a win for the business. And let's talk about the people, because that's the bit I like the most. Now, over and above the benefits of playing on a bigger stage, reward and recognition, building your network, all those kind of good things. For me, the CX Cup is a Trojan horse, because the first thing we did with those 10 teams that we selected was we gave them service design training. And we also said to them, as you go through this judging process, you will be required to demonstrate how you fell in love with the problem, how you used insight, how you worked with your customers, whoever they were, how you avoided starting with your assumptions and just falling in love with your own solutions far too soon. So it's a Trojan horse. We wheeled it into the center of the organization, and out popped service design training and that obsession with falling in love with the customer problem. My last slide, I actually wanted to give a shout out to the team that came second. So these are the second place team. This is a UK team. It's a team that manages advisors. So it's our proposition to advisors and intermediaries. They're called X-Ray Vision. And the quote, I just love this quote. So the prototype report is fantastic, the best thing that's ever come out of Funds Network. This needs rolling out as soon as possible. If you need any letters of support to G this along, give me a shout. So I love that because it shows a customer who is totally engaged. It shows a customer who is invested in this solution. And it shows a customer who almost feels like they're part of the team. They're saying, if you need me to help, talk to your managers to make this thing happen, then for God's sake, please let me get involved. So that's a great example. And obviously, this is an advisor that they had used right from the start of that 5-month process. So they went out and they interviewed him. They showed him early prototypes. And then obviously, they showed him the prototype that they showed at the grand final. So a good example of how we're trying to get people to fall in love with the problem, but also accelerate that process, but take your customers with you along the way. And I guess I've probably run out of time. So thank you, firstly, and then I have some contact details, because I anticipated not having much time, because it was going to be a rush. But I'm going to be around all day as well. Thank you.